I just recorded an entire podcast, but I forgot to hit record. So we're doing it again! So here we go. Here's my cool little shirt. This is Camus, Living Kills. Camus is an existential philosopher who won the Nobel Prize in Literature back in 1954-ish. Existential. Why am I so close? Can't zoom out. Well, screw you. So today we're going to be looking at finishing up Thoreau. I really wanted to reread the conclusion from, gosh, I really just did like a whole hour, but that's okay. We will bring back that same energy and do this all over again. Okay, so we're going to reread that passage. In the age of anti-intellectualism, learning is an act of rebellion. And that is the theme of today's podcast. So I'm going to recover the last bit of Thoreau in Walden. We're going to read his, just so we make sure we clearly have the Wikipedia facts right about him. We're going to read the back cover and just kind of summarize like who he is as a person. We're going to read Civil Disobedience, skipping some parts and really just capturing the essence of what he's trying to capture there. Talk briefly about Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem and the banality of evil, and then move in and then see where things go from there, and probably just wrap it up with Thoreau today, and then we'll move on tomorrow to something new. And I really wanted to talk about the age of anti-intellectualism, the idea that there's lots of reasons for people to be anti-intellectual. Number one, it's just so overwhelming. There's such a huge volume of literary works out there, and they're very daunting because even when you read them, it's very easy to misconstrue what they're saying because the language is either dense in an old dead language, or is just like what academics say the text is saying is very different from what you understand of the text. So it can be difficult and intimidating to go with, but I believe it's all the more important, especially in today when democracy and like our democratic institutions are really facing these challenges that are it's just not really prepared to deal with. And so we'll just jump right back into it. New for you, refresher for me. Hopefully this second time around I'll have my words a bit better, but I thought it was a great podcast, so hopefully I can recreate it to a good extent. How worn and dusty then must be the highways of old, how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. I do not wish to take a cabin passage, but rather go before the mast and on the deck of the world, and there I could best see the moonlight amid the mountains. I do not wish to go below now. I learned this, at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will be met with success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind which will pass in invisible boundaries. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him. The old laws will be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense, and he will live with the license of a higher order of beings. In proportion as he simplifies his life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex, and solitude will not be solitude, nor poverty poverty, nor weakness weakness. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. Your work need not be lost. This is where they should be. Now put your foundations under them. It is a grueling task of building up that network of knowledge to be sufficiently confident in what you're doing. And I feel like it is only as I have just started to grow gray hair that I've begun to find my voice and begun to be able to articulate what I believe. But I've only just begun to find my voice, I feel like, and I feel like I can help guide people through some of these works. So now moving on to Civil Disobedience and Other Essays. So again, I'm going to be skipping quite a few parts in here. The essay itself is only 18, 19 pages, but again, he goes into quite detail. Oh, yeah, sorry, I wanted to also read the back of the Walden book, just so you have a clear understanding of what academics say about him. I will also point out that as a first generation student, meaning like my parents didn't go to university, as is common of a lot of people my age. Mostly I just get tripped up on, I do get tripped up on words quite easily, in terms, because I'm just reading them. I often don't know how other people pronounce words, and so I will often missay things. But also, I just don't have the natural gifting in academia as if comparable to someone who actually grew up in it. You could see this most clearly exemplified in someone like Justin Trudeau, the current leader of Canada, where he literally grew up in politics. He's such a natural politician. And I don't think anyone can really deny that. When he's on the campaign trail, when his polling numbers aren't so low, he's just such a natural orator. He knows how to do crowd work. He can, when the crowd is low energy, he goes in high energy. When the crowd is high energy, he goes in low, like when he's not dealing with his own supporters. And he just has such a good command of the room in that regard. Certainly there's we want better of him in terms of his personality and his overall policies, for sure. But as is with most leaders in politics after they have been in power for a period of time, but the naturalness with which academics speak about these ancient thinkers is just, not to say that I'll never be as good as them, but it is certainly a barrier to recognize that I perhaps will never be as naturally good at academia because I didn't grow up with it. This is a self-study pursuit in a lot of respects, especially outside of academia. So here we go. For naturalist, essayist, and early environmentalist Henry David Thoreau, 1817 to 1862, nature was a religion. In communicating with the natural world, he wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and learn what it had to teach. Toward that end, Thoreau built a cabin in the spring of 1845 on the shores of Walden Pond on land owned by Ralph Waldo Emerson. We're actually going to be reading Emerson probably tomorrow. Emerson is a politician in the area. I believe he's from Illinois, but I guess we'll find out tomorrow. And is a friend of Thoreau, who is also a thinker. One of my favorite quotes from Emerson is, "True friendship requires true knowledge." So there you go. Outside Concord, Massachusetts. There he observed nature, farmed, built fences, surveyed, and wrote in his journal. One product of his 2-year sojourn was this book, a great classic of American letters, interwoven with accounts of Thoreau's daily life, our meditations on human existence, society, government, and other topics expressed with the wisdom and beauty of style. Walden offers abundant evidence of Thoreau's ability to begin with observations on mundane incident or the minutiae of nature, and then develop these observations into profound remunerations on the most fundamental human concerns. Credited with influencing Tolstoy, Gandhi, and other thinkers, the volume remains a masterpiece of philosophical reflection. Those are some kind words. Okay. Civil disobedience. So one of the core ideas of this essay is that the government doesn't always pass just laws. And we, as citizens, need to recognize that as such and to determine whether or not it is morally right for us to follow these laws. And considering the time period, slavery was still happening. Of course, we still have modern-day slavery in the form of prison labor or the cocoa industry or the sex industry in general. Modern slavery undeniably still exists. And it is not until and he talks about, he talks about actual slavery in this book, but the idea that he says this over and over again. The government is best which governs least. The government is best which governs not at all. The government itself, I'm skipping parts here in between these lines for this first little bit. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. And so, And I mean, this is really reflective of the time period that we are currently in, where Trump has come to power on the will of the people. And he is not breaking, for the most part, he's not breaking any constitutional laws. And those that are being challenged in court, for sure. But this is the whole core of democracy rests on the people's abilities on the public's ability to elect good leaders. And when people are enraged, and this is perhaps a major fault with modern economics, is that it's all based around math and doesn't take into consideration these once in 100-year events, just like flight safety, whereby they always talk about like the Swiss cheese model, where the holes in the Swiss cheese are potentials for flight safety incidents. So like as if we were throwing something at the Swiss cheese, and every now and again it might fall through one of the holes. But there are several pieces of cheese behind that one piece of cheese, which is representative of other checks and balances on these powers. And so you have the presidency, you have the Supreme Court, you have Congress, like the Senate and the House of Representatives. Like, we're talking specifically about the United States here, obviously. But when, like is the case today, the president has control of all of those checks on his power, then the system has a real potential for a flight safety. You have the opportunity for a flight safety incident, or in this case, the president can wield dictatorial powers and can use those powers to essentially accomplish anything that they want. And it becomes a very dangerous situation. What's that quote? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's just, human nature is not designed to be able to have that kind of unlimited power, and it just gets perverted so quickly when it is thrust upon someone like that, especially if it's not entirely expected. But yeah, okay, so let's keep reading the book. And oh yeah, and then we need to talk about Hannah Arendt. So Eichmann in Jerusalem. Hannah Arendt is a philosophy professor, I believe, from Stanford, who, reporting on behalf of the New Yorker, goes to the Nuremberg trials to watch Eichmann's trial. Eichmann being an SS officer who is on trial for crimes against humanity because of the 1930s Germany situation. Very proficient administrator. We can recognize his skill. But in his defense at the International Criminal Court, he basically says, well, it's not my fault. I followed the letter of the law. I didn't do anything wrong. I did my job actually quite proficiently. Why are you putting me on trial at all? And I mean, he eventually gets tried with crimes against humanity, of course. And Hannah Arendt, in trying to reconcile how we could do this to someone who never actually broke the letter of the law, she talks about like the banality of evil, where banality mean like the boringness of evil, where it's just like all that is needed is for good men to do nothing. All that is needed for evil to exist is for good men to do nothing. And I think that's quite reflective of our times too. If the same number of people voted for Kamala Harris as voted for Joe Biden, we would not be in this situation. But the part that has failed modern economics so vastly is that when we don't account for the people at the bottom, when quality of life is rapidly diminishing, and no one even on the political spectrum is even willing to talk about it, even willing to address these issues in any meaningful or substantial way, gosh, the number of solutions we can come up with to help ease these cost of living issues. Like, why can't ICBC be expanded to Alberta? Alberta's currently paying $300 to $600 a month for insurance, for car insurance. And here in BC, we only pay like, man, I only pay like $110 a month. And we even get rebates back at the end of the year so that it's even less than that. Like, I think it was even $90 a year for the past few years. It's crazy. Like, why can't we be expanding these services to cover other provinces? Sure, I don't understand the complexity of the system, and I don't understand all the insurance rules. But that's just like one example. When I talk to other people my age, they have such creative solutions and reforms for the entire system, but it often requires like multiple departments or systemic change in order to accomplish those ends. And I'm not saying that each of these ideas wouldn't have their knock-on effects that would that could also be damaging to the system, but we can see that, or perhaps won't even work at all, but we could see these ideas taking shape in a lot of these young leaders, like I'm saying, like in their 20s or even early 30s, who aren't yet in leadership positions. Just absolutely brilliant ideas that I would love to cover in later episodes, that would just absolutely transform and revolutionize our modern Canadian way of life, or even the international order, if anyone would ever allow our generation to lead. But it's not surprising when the bottom half feels like they're being stomped out of existence, that they then start turning to the most radical figure, simply so that they can feel like they're being heard. And it's the most natural of human responses, because there is no other outlet. They have to use their voice to be able to be heard. And yeah, there's going to be some short-term pain, but if no one will recognize them for for the value that they have, or no one will help address the issues that they face on a day-to-day basis, like the Liberal parties both in the United States and Canada, it's a top-down approach. They dictate what the policy will be of the party. They're not engaging with us to ask us what we think. They don't care what we think. And this is why I'm very hesitant about Mark Carney, because he doesn't care what we think. He doesn't care about the issues we face on a day-to-day basis. I'm a Liberal supporter through and through, like the old guard Liberal, not the Trudeau Liberals who swung so far to the left that they're out-socializing the NDP. But your Jean Chrétien, your Pierre Elliott Trudeau, not all of his stuff, obviously, but like the ideas that we are rights-based society, that we are working towards the good of the Canadian people and not just for the elites. And because conservatism in general, it always, like, this trickle-down economics just does not work. It's very good for economic security, and there are benefits to that mode of thinking and that way of approaching the economy in general. I shouldn't be talking about all this because I'm not an economist, but certainly it's just my opinion. But here, let's get back to the text. Let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be one step towards obtaining it. Skipping ahead again. Again, this essay is only like 18, 19 pages, but I'm going to read a good couple of pages from here on. Unjust laws exist. Shall we be content to obey them, or shall we endeavor to amend them and obey them until we have succeeded, or shall we transgress them at once? Men generally, under such governments as this, think that they ought to wait until they have persuaded the majority to alter them. They think that if they should resist, the remedy should be worse than the evil. But it is the fault of the government itself that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. Why is it not more apt to anticipate and provide for reform? Why does it not cherish its wise minority? Why does it not cry and resist before it is hurt? Why does it not encourage its citizens to be on the alert, to point out its faults, and not do better than it would have them? Why does it always crucify Christ, excommunicate Copernicus and Luther, and pronounce Washington and Franklin as rebels? One would think that a deliberate and practical denial of its authority was the only offense never contemplated by government. Else, why has it not assigned its definite and its suitable and proportionate penalty? If a man who has no property refuses but once to earn 9 shillings for the state, he is put into prison for a period unlimited by the law, any law that I know, and determined only by the discretion of those who place him there. But if he should steal 90 times 9 shillings from the state, he is soon permitted to go at large again. If the injustice is part of the necessary friction of the machine of government, let it go. Let it go, perchance it will wear smooth. Certainly the machine will wear out. If the injustice has a spring or a pulley or a rope or a crank exclusively for itself, then perhaps you may consider whether the remedy will be worse than the evil. But if it is of such a nature that it requires you to be the agent of injustice to another, then I say break the law. Let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine, what I have to do is to see, at any rate, that I do not lend myself to the wrong which I condemn. As for adopting the ways which the state has provided for remedying the evil, I know not of such ways. They take too much time, and a man's life will be gone. I have other affairs to attend to. I came into this world not chiefly to make this a good place to live in, but to live in it, be it a good man be it good or bad. A man has not everything to do, but something, and because he cannot do everything, it is not necessary that he should do something wrong. It is not my business to be petitioning the governor or the legislature any more than it is theirs to petition me. And if they should not hear my petition, what should I do then? But in the case the state has not provided... But in this case, the state has provided no way. Its very constitution is evil. This may seem to me harsh and stubborn and unconciliatory, but it is to treat with the utmost kindness and consideration that only spirit and that can appreciate or deserves it. So is all charge for the better, like birth and death which convulse the body. I do not hesitate to say that those who call themselves abolitionists should at once effectively withdraw their support, both in person and property, from the government of Massachusetts, and not wait until they constitute a majority of one, before they suffer the right to prevail through them. I think that it is enough if they have God on their side, without wanting for that of the other. Moreover, any man more right than his neighbors constitute a majority of one already. I meet this American government or its representative, the state government, directly and face to face once a year, no more, in the person of its tax gatherer. That is the only mode in which a man situated as I am necessarily meets it. And it then says distinctly, recognize me, and the simplest, the most effectual, and in the present posture of affairs, the indispensableness mode of treating with it on its head, of expressing your little satisfaction with and love for it, is to deny it then. My civil neighbor, the tax gatherer, is the very man I have to deal with, for it is, after all, with men and not with parchment that I quarrel. And he has voluntarily chosen to be the agent of a government. How shall he ever know well what he is and what does as an officer of the government or as a man, until he is obligated to consider whether he shall treat me, his neighbor, for whom he has respect as a neighbor and well-disposed man, or as a maniac and a disturber of the peace, and see if he can get over this obstruction to his neighborliness without a ruder and more impetuous thought or speech corresponding with his action. I know this well, that if 1,000, if 100, if 10 men whom I could name, if 10 honest men only, if one honest man in the state of Massachusetts, ceasing to hold slaves, were actually to withdraw from this copartnership and be locked up in the county jail therefore, it would be the abolition of slavery in America. For it matters not how small the beginning may seem to be. What is once well done is done forever. But we love better to talk about it. That we say is our mission. Reform keeps many scores of newspapers in its service, but not one man. If my esteemed neighbor, the state's ambassador, who will devote his days to the settlement of the question of human rights in the council chamber, instead of being threatened with the prisons of Carolina, were to sit down with the prisoner of Massachusetts, that state which is so anxious to foist the sin of slavery upon her sister, though at present she can deliver only an act of inhospitality to be the ground of a quarrel with her, the legislature would not wholly waive the subject the following winter. Under a government which imprisons any unjustly, the true place for a just man is also a prison. The proper place today, the only place which Massachusetts has provided for her freer and less desponding spirits, is in her prisons. To be put out and locked out of the state by her own act, as they have already put themselves out by their principles. It is there that the fugitive slave, that the Mexican prisoner on parole, and the Indian come to plead the wrongs of his race. Should they should find them on the separate but more free and honorable ground where the state places those who are not with her but against her. The only house in a slave state in which a free man can abide with honor. If any think that their influence would be lost there, and their voices no longer afflict the ear of the state, that they would not be as enemy within its walls, they do not know by how much truth is stronger than error, nor how much more eloquently and effectively he can combat injustice who has experienced a little in his own person. Cast your whole vote. Not a strip of paper merely, but your whole influence. A minority is powerless while it conforms to the majority. It is not even a majority then, but it is irresistible when it clogs by its whole weight. If the alternative is to keep all just men in prison or give up war and slavery, the state will not hesitate which to choose. If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bill this year, that would not be a violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them, and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood. This is, in fact, the definition of a peaceable revolution, if any such is possible. But the tax gatherer or any other public officer asks me, as one has done, "But what shall I do?" My answer is, if you really wish to do anything, resign your office. When the subject has refused allegiance and the officer has resigned his office, then the revolution is accomplished. But even suppose blood should flow. Is there not a sort of bloodshed when the conscience is wounded? Through this wound, a man's real manliness and immortality flow out, and he bleeds to an everlasting death. I see this blood flowing now. I have contemplated the imprisonment of the offender rather than the seizure of his goods, though both will serve the same purpose, because they who assert the purest right and consequently are most dangerous to a corrupt state commonly have not spent much time in accumulated property. To such the state renders comparatively small service, and a slight tax is wont to appear exorbitant, particularly if they are obliged to earn it by special labor with their hands. If there were one who lived wholly without the use of money, the state itself would hesitate to demand it of him. But the rich man, not to make any invidious comparison, is always sold to the institution which makes him rich. Absolutely speaking, the more money, the less virtue. The more money, the less virtue, for money comes between a man and his objects, and obtains them for him, and it was certainly no great virtue to obtain it. It puts to rest many questions which would otherwise be taxed to answer, while the only new question which it puts to the hard but superfluous one, how to spend it. Thus his moral ground is taken from under his feet. The opportunities of living are diminished in proportion as what are called the means are increased. The best thing a man can do for his culture when he is rich is to endeavor to carry out those schemes which he entertained when he was poor. Christ answered the Herodians, according to their condition. "Show me the tribute money," said he, and one took a penny out of his pocket. If you use money which has the image of Caesar on it, and which he has made current and valuable, that is, if you are men of the state and gladly enjoy the advantages of Caesar's government, then pay him back some of his own when he demands it. Render therefore to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and to God those things which are God's, leaving them no wiser than before as to which was which, for they did not wish to know. When I converse with the freest of my neighbors, I perceive that whatever they may say about the magnitude and seriousness of the question, and their regard for the public tranquility, the long and the short of the matter is that they cannot spare the protection of the existing government, and they dread the consequences of disobedience to it, to their property and families. For my own part, I should not like to think that I ever rely upon the protection of the state, but if I deny the authority of the state when it presents its tax bill, it will soon take and waste all my property, and so harass me and my children without end. This is hard. This makes it impossible for a man to live honestly and at the same time comfortably in outward respects. It will not be worth the while to accumulate property that would be sure to go again. You must hire or squat somewhere and raise but a small crop and eat that soon. You must live within yourself and depend upon yourself, always tucked up and ready for a start, and not have many affairs. A man may grow rich in Turkey even, if he will in all respects be a good subject of the Turkish government. Confucius said, if a state is governed by the principles of reason, poverty and misery are subjects of shame. If a state is not governed by the principles of reason, riches and honors are the subjects of shame. I'm going to read that one more time. If the state is governed by the principles of reason, poverty and misery are subjects of shame. If a state is not governed by the principles of reason, riches and honors are the subjects of shame. No, until I want the protection of Massachusetts to be extended to me in some distant southern port where my liberty is endangered, or until I am bent solely on building up my estate at home by peaceful enterprise, I can afford to refuse allegiance to Massachusetts and her rights to my property and life. It costs me less in every sense to incur the penalty of disobedience to the state than it would be to obey. I should feel as if I were worth less in that case. Some years ago, the state met me in behalf of the church and commanded me to pay a certain sum toward the support of the clergyman, whose preaching my father attended, but never I myself. Pay it, it said, or be locked up in jail. I declined to pay, but unfortunately another man saw fit to pay it. I do not see why the schoolmaster should be taxed to support the priest, and not the priest the schoolmaster. For I was not the state schoolmaster, but I supported myself by voluntary subscription. I do not see why the Lyceum should not present its tax bill and have the state to back its demand, as well as the church. However, at the request of the selectmen, I condescended to make some such statement as this in writing. Know all men by their presence that I, Henry Thoreau, do not wish to be regarded as a member of any incorporated society which I have not joined. This I gave to the town clerk, and he has it. The state, having thus learned that I do not wish to be regarded as a member of that church, has never made a like demand on me since, though it has said that it must adhere to its original presumption that time. If I had known how to name them, I should have signed off in detail from all the societies which I never signed on to, but I did not know where to find a complete list. I have paid no poll tax for 6 years. I was put into jail once on this account. I remember the next word. Account. For one night, and as I stood considering the walls of the solid stone, of solid stone, 2 or 3 feet thick, the door of wood and iron, a foot thick, and the iron grating which strained the light, I could not help being struck with the foolishness of that institution which treated me as if I were mere flesh, blood, and bones, to be locked up. I wondered that it should have concluded at length that this was the best use it could put me to, and had never thought to avail itself of my services in some way. I saw that, if there was a wall of stone between me and my townsmen, there was still more difficult one to climb or break through before they could get to be as free as I was. I did not for a moment feel confined, and the walls seemed a great waste of stone and mortar. I felt as if I was I felt as if I alone of all my townsmen had paid my taxes. They plainly did not know how to treat me, but behaved like persons who were underbred. In every threat and in every compliment there was a blunder, for they thought that my chief desire was to stand on the other side of that stone wall. But I could not but smile to see how industriously they locked the door on my meditations, which followed them out again without let or hindrance. And they were really all that was dangerous. As they could not reach me, they had resolved to punish my body, just as boys, if they cannot come at some person against whom they have spite, will abuse his dog. I saw the state was half-witted, that it was timid as a lone woman with her silver spoons, and that it did not know its friends from its foes, and I lost all my remaining respect for it and pitied it. Thus, the state never intentionally confronts a man's senses, intellectual or moral, but only his body, his senses. It is not armed with superior wit or honesty, but with superior physical strength. I was not born to be forced. I will breathe after my own fashion. Let us see who is the strongest. What force has a multitude? They only can force me who obey a law higher than I. They force me to become like themselves. I do not hear of men being forced to live this way or that by the masses of men. What sort of life were that to live? When I meet a government which says to me, your money or your life, why should I be in haste to give it my money? It may be in a great strait and not know what to do. I cannot help that. It must help itself. Do as I do. It is not worth the while to snivel about it. I am not responsible for the successful working of machinery of society. I am not the son of the engineer. I perceive that. When an acorn and a chestnut fall side by side, the one does not remain inert to make way for the other, but both obey their own laws, and spring and grow and flourish as best they can, till one, perchance, overshadows and destroys the other. If a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. This is the part where he is going into his time in prison and talking about his cellmate who was accused of burning down a barn. Largely uninteresting, so we're going to skip ahead. And then we're going to read the last few pages. Just want to make sure there's no underlined parts in this section before I skip it all. Yeah, we're going to read from page 16 onwards. I know that most men think differently from myself, but those whose lives are by profession devoted to the study of these or kindred subjects content me as little as any. Statesmen and legislators standing so completely within the institution never distinctly and nakedly behold it. They speak of moving society, but have no resting place without it. They may be men of a certain experience and discrimination, and have no doubt invented ingenious and even useful systems for which we sincerely thank them, but all their wit and usefulness lie within certain not very wide limits. They are wont to forget that the world is not governed by policy and expediency. Webster never goes behind government, and so cannot speak with authority about it. His words are wisdom to those legislators who contemplate no essential reform in the existing government, but for thinkers, and those who legislate for all time. He never once glances at the subject. I know of those whose serene and wise speculations on this theme would soon reveal the limits of his mind's range and hospitality, yet compared with the cheap professions of most reformers, and still the cheaper wisdom and eloquence of politicians in general, his are almost the only sensible and valuable words. And we thank heaven for him. Comparatively, he is always strong, original, and above all, practical. Still, his quality is not wisdom, but prudence. The lawyer's truth is not truth, but consistency or consistent expediency. Truth is always in harmony with herself, and is not concerned chiefly to reveal the justice that may consist with wrongdoing. He well deserved to be called, as he has been called, the defender of the Constitution. There are really no blows to be given by him but defensive ones. He is not a leader, but a follower. His leaders are the men of '87. I have never made an effort, he says. We're running out of time, so I'm going to try to go through this. I have never and never mean to continuance and effort to disturb an arrangement as originally made by which the various states came into the Union. Still thinking of the sanction which the Constitution gives to slavery, he says, because it was part of the original compact, let it stand. Notwithstanding his special acuteness and ability, he is unable to take a fact out of its merely political relations and behold it as it lies, absolutely to be disposed of by the intellect. What, for instance, it behooves a man to do here in America today with regard to slavery, but ventures or is driven to make some such desperate answer as the following, while professing to speak absolutely as the private man, from which what new and singular code of social duties might be inferred. The manner, he says, in which the government of those states where slavery exists are to be regulated is for their own consideration, under their responsibility to their constituents, to the general laws of propriety, humanity, and justice, and to God. Associations formed elsewhere, springing from a feeling of humanity or any other cause, have nothing whatsoever to do with it. They have never received any encouragement from me, and they never will. They who know of no pure sources of truth, who have traced up its steam no higher, stand and wisely stand by the Bible and Constitution, and drink at it there with reverence and humility. But they who behold where it comes trickling into this lake or that pond, gird up their loins once more, and continue their pilgrimage toward its fountainhead. No man with a genius for legislation has appeared in America. They are rare in the history of the world. They are orators, politicians, and eloquent men by the thousand. But the speaker has not yet opened his mouth to speak, who is capable of settling the much vexed questions of the day. We love eloquence for its own sake, and not for the truth which it may utter, or any heroism it may inspire. Our legislatures have not yet... Last page. Has not yet learned the comparative value of free trade and freedom, of union and of rectitude to a nation. They have no genius or talent for comparatively humble questions of taxation and finance, commerce and manufacturers and agricultural. If we were left solely to the wordy wit of the legislatures and Congress for our guidance, uncorrected by the seasonable experience and the effectual complaints of the people, America would not long retain her rank among the nations. For 1800 years, though perchance I have no right to say it, the New Testament has been written. Yet where is the legislator who has wisdom and practical talent enough to avail himself of the light which it sheds on the science of legislation? The authority of government, even such as I am willing to submit to, for I will cheerfully obey those who know and can do better than I, and in many things even those who neither know nor can do so well, is still an impure one. To be strictly just, it must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property but what I concede to it. The progress from an absolute to a limited monarchy, from a limited monarchy to a democracy, is a process towards a true respect for the individual. Is a democracy such as we know it the last improvement possible in government? Is it not possible to take a step further towards recognizing and organizing the rights of man? There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. I please myself with imagining a state at last which can afford to be just to all men, and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor, which even would not think it inconsistent with its own repose, if a few were to live aloft from it, not meddling with it, nor embraced by it, who fulfilled all the duties of neighbors and fellow men. A state which bore this kind of fruit, and suffered it to drop off as fast as it ripened, would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state, which I have also imagined, but not yet anywhere seen. Whew! I am glad we got through that all over again. And I am parched for water for sure. But what a great writer Thoreau is, and inspiring nonetheless. I think I'm just going to end that there. I just want to kind of bring it back to the beginning and just say, in a state when we are faced with anti-intellectualism throughout the country and throughout the world, learning is an act of rebellion. I just want to bring that up again, because here we can very clearly see that learning is our opportunity to be able to question what is going on around us, and to be able to come to our own answers about what we think when we come forward. I'm certainly only expressing my own opinions when I'm talking about the government and the state, but yeah, I'm excited for moving forward and to be entertaining new ideas. Emerson's up for tomorrow. We're going to be reading Self-Reliance, and then I really love his essay on friendship as well. So we'll do that too. So anyways, have a good day and enjoy.